Welcome to the channel. Today's colors: titanium white, yellow permanent light, yellow deep, pyrrole red, madder lake, ultramarine blue, phthalo blue, and burnt umber. For a medium, I'm using the quick dry medium. These are all water mixable oils made by Cobra, or rather Royal Talons, and the line is Cobra. Here I'm starting with my dark, which is a mixture of madder lake and ultramarine blue. This is an 11 by 14 canvas. And this is a number 8 flat brush. I'm not using a reference today. This is from my imagination. Trying to build in a few darks in the foreground that will hopefully provide a way into the painting. And at this point, since I'm using my imagination, I'm not really clear what I am painting yet. This could also be used as an exercise when you're beginning to paint. Kind of a practice painting, if you will, before you tackle another topic using a reference photo of some kind. Start with the big shapes. So this is going to be a section of trees. And I'm trying to vary the brush strokes, of course. In today's video, we're going to be focusing on light, the effects of light. And now I'm going to put another grouping of trees over at the other side. Incidentally, if you're interested in painting composition, a great book to purchase would be Edgar Payne's book on composition. It is pricey on Amazon, but well worth it. Gives you tons of ideas on creating compositions. So now I'm going to wipe this brush off. These are my primary dark shapes I'm going to try to use. I use shop towels as my go-to towel. I find that they don't shed lint like the other towels do, and they hold up very well. I use less of them in the painting process when I do. My easel is a Maybeth easel. It's a full box easel. I use this in the studio as well as outdoors in plein air. After much experimentation, I have found that French easels, although they are cumbersome because of their weight, are very handy to have. And as long as you're not going to great distances to paint some subject matter, they provide the stability you need. I have never had a French easel blow over, for example. And I can carry almost all my stuff within the easel itself. It is heavier than other of the setups that you can purchase, but it's also very stable, like I said, and I actually prefer it. And then, of course, the other reason why you might want to consider a Maybeth or maybe a Julian French easel, and those are the two brands that I would recommend. Do not get one of the cheap no-name brands. There's many out there. I can save you a lot of frustration in that regard because oftentimes the legs are the first to go. Usually the workmanship is just rather shoddy, but I've not experienced that with the Maybeth line or the Julian French easels. Although of the two, I would prefer the Maybeth. Alright, so this is a mixture of ultramarine blue and titanium white. And I am picking and choosing spots to allow that color to bleed through this group of what will eventually become trees. One of the first goals that I find in the painting process is to cover the canvas as quickly as possible. And so even though I'm working with my imagination today, no reference work, I'm still trying to work relatively quickly. And here I'm mixing right into my initial pile of blue. That way I can tell the tonal value. And I want it darker on the top. And so now that I have that, I'm laying that color in. Of course, everything is relative to the other colors, and so that's one of the reasons why most artists will shoot for about the color that they need. And if they hit it, that's great, but if not, that's okay too, because you can always come back in. And oftentimes you really don't know how to judge the particular color value until you get other colors in relationship to it. For my work, I'm primarily interested in color. Color and shapes. I tend to like landscape paintings that have a lot of mystery in them, that are perhaps more abstract rather than realistic, although there are times in which I enjoy trying to produce a little bit more realistic work. It just depends on my mood. I imagine a lot of artists are like that as well. Once again, just filling in the sky and mixing into to the previous lighter blue, creating a little bit of variety in the color. Here I'm more or less using my flat brush as maybe other artists might use a fan brush. Fairly satisfied with the painting at this point. And now I don't want a dark line across the horizon, although it's oftentimes good to put a horizon line in there to start a painting. Now I'm trying to soften that line as I work my way down the painting towards the viewer and towards the foreground. These are water mixable oils, like I said, from Royal Talons. It's a Cobra line, which is their professional water mixable oils. I don't use a lot of water in my technique, so I find that these function just like regular oils for me. What I like is that when I need to work in the studio, I don't have to open up mineral spirits or even Gamsol. And so I find that that works better for me. And I do know a lot of artists that have gotten allergies from turpentine, at least, and some other harsh chemicals that used to be used to clean brushes and also to thin paint. And so, although Gamsol, I have used that and have not had any problems with that, but I find that if I can cut down on my expenses, that always helps, and also less things to have to pack For example, with water mixable oils, that's one less thing I have to bring is a can for the mineral spirits and mineral spirits themselves. This way, I can basically take my water drinking bottle and use that to drink, as well as to use that as a thinner for my paints. So that saves a little bit on the weight. This here is a mix. This green mixture is a mixture of the permanent yellow light along with a little bit of the ultramarine blue. And like I said, right now I'm just trying to cover the canvas and get an approximate color for the landscape that I'm thinking about in my mind at this point. And I'm still not clear exactly what the focal point's going to be or anything right now. I'm kind of trying to discover the painting as I'm painting. But the advantage of this is that there's really no pressure on me. I can change it at will. And so if I make a mistake or do not like a particular stroke, I can always correct it, scrape it off, paint over it. Now, as we're moving closer to the foreground, I've shifted the color using some more ultramarine blue to make it a little bit bluer in its value. And then I'm using the darks that I had already previously laid as part of this imaginary landscape. Perhaps eventually I might turn this middle section I'm painting over right now into some rocks or a path of some kind to perhaps lead people's eyes. And of course, notice here the effect of light. So as I'm moving forward, I'm imagining that I'm from a vantage point of some other trees that are creating shade. And so as I'm looking out on this field, I am, of course, also the colors are going to be darker and more varied with color as they are closer to me as the viewer or painter in this case. And so I've set the painting up to have some lighter green areas that you can clearly see here, and then some darker ones as we move forward. And that will become more obvious, I hope, as I continue to paint today. And once again, I'm trying to work as quick as I possibly can to get the initial lay in. This canvas today, by the way, was a canvas panel, and it was not toned prior, so it's a white panel. I usually tone mine with some type of usually a light red or a yellowish yellow oxide or a red oxide color, transparent, just to take the white off. And I will do that prior to painting on it. I'll give it several days to dry, so that way I don't have to compete with the white canvas. But today I was in a hurry and didn't have a chance to have an underpainting done on a panel, so I just grabbed a white panel and started painting on it. And these are, you're probably asking about the brushes, and in the other videos I've been using some Aspen a line from Princeton. This is a generic line of brushes. I think they were given as a gift, or maybe I picked them up at a Michael's store or something. Horrible paint brushes, by the way. I don't think they even have a name to them. I only used them for this painting and decided this isn't going to work. In fact, some of the brush shapes were already splayed by the time I was done with this just one painting. So you get what you pay for. Of course, one nice thing sometimes, if you're starting and you're a beginner, to use some really bad brushes is that if you're working on and you like loose brush strokes, if you're trying to provide a little bit more creativity. Sometimes bad brushes can be great to paint with. They're unpredictable. They provide some marks that you would not get with a very fine paintbrush, and sometimes that's exactly what you're looking for. Here I'm taking another device I learned from one of the artists, Charlie Hunter, uses this method to create some different lines and different effects. And so once in a while I will use that too. Here I'm kind of basically laying that down to take some of the paint off of the canvas and expose a different tone here. And what I'm trying to do is figure out how to get the viewers into the painting. And so I've taken some of this paint off as a way to kind of create a sort of path, if you will, into the painting. Don't know if I'm exactly happy with that at this point. And now it just looks kind of like a series of lines. And so I'm now taking a shop towel and using that to basically just go back over these marks I've made to soften those edges of the the lines that were created with the instrument. So just trying to create kind of a random effect here without moving the paint too much. So sometimes I use instruments just because I have them handy, um, and that might have been the case in this painting with the squeegee. I don't know that any of the marks that I had made there were all that necessary. And in fact, I think that's the last time you see me reach for that during this particular painting. But I'm still hopeful there may be a couple occasions in which I'll actually use that squeegee for something meaningful. I am not a big fan of painting buildings, and maybe that's part of the reason I don't use it as much. Charlie Hunter, as many of you know, paints a lot of buildings in his, and of course he does it in a more of a tonalist fashion with only using a couple of colors to tell the story of his paintings. What I've discovered is that I really admire certain artists and their techniques, but I have to go my own way. And of course, the only way you know that is by continuing to paint a lot, and then you will figure out what your style is. And even if you like certain artists and you watch their instructional videos, we really don't want to be copycats of each other. We want to find our own identity. And so pick and choose and borrow from those that you admire. But the more you paint, the more you'll discover what really fits you in your particular painting structure. One thing I've discovered about myself during the years has been that there are many artists that I really like their paintings, but I really cannot emulate them, and I have to find my own way. And you can probably tell by now that I really enjoy working with color. So probably no monotone paintings from me that look like Charlie Hunter's. This is a yellow that's been dulled down with a little bit of burnt umber. And now I'm using the darkest darks I put down originally as kind of dark highlights as I go back into these shapes with this yellow color. So I'm thinking about the fall. It's fall when I'm painting this. It's November here in Missouri. And so I'm wanting to bring in the fall foliage colors into these tree groupings. And once again, the theme of today's painting is to try to show you a little bit of the effects of the sun on a painting. And so I'm hoping that these base layers will help accentuate where the light is coming from. And also, you'll notice that this looks rather rough. It doesn't look very finished. It looks terrible, perhaps, at this point in time. Keep in mind, as I've said in some of my other videos, that you have to work past this. The early stages of a painting oftentimes will be rather ugly until you have a chance to pull some things together in subsequent layers of paint. And in the end, what you're really looking for is a lot of variations in some of the values and tones of these various colors. And so by putting in some of these early layers and washes, that will eventually help to provide that variety. By the way, this is a good point in the video to remind you that if you like the content of these videos, please feel free to give me a thumbs up. And then if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. That will help me to be able to produce more videos in the future. Here, another darker yellow mixture, or what I should say, a lighter. This is more permanent yellow mixed in with a little bit of titanium white and just a tad bit of the burnt umber to take down the yellow. I never use a color right out of the tube, so it's always a mixture of something. And so here, I'm hoping that this yellow will become an accent of where the sun is shining on this tree grouping, which will hopefully correspond to the ground layer and the lighter green that you're seeing now. Now, as I'm looking at this video, I'm noticing that yellow is a little bit more yellowy than, I don't think yellowy is a word, but more yellow than I had originally anticipated when I was actually painting it. And of course, you'll notice I use that same color on the other side to the other tree grouping. Sometimes that's very important too. If you're going to use one color, even if it's more of an accent color, to put it in different places in the painting, that will help with your color harmony. If you just take one tube of one particular color and you're using just a little bit of it in one place in the painting, it will draw too much attention to itself. You really need to integrate it more into a painting, and it's one of the principles behind using a limited palette, because in the limited palette you're pretty much going to be using each and every one of those colors at some point in time, and that helps to pull the painting together. And from time to time, I've tried to cut some of this out, but a lot of painting is sitting back and looking, or getting up and moving back and getting a distance from the painting itself to see what is going on. The viewer is actually not going to be up as close as you are when you're painting the painting. They're going to be looking at it from a distance. And it's important that you are constantly backing up and looking at your painting from a distance. especially if you are a painter that's really looking at making an impressionistic type work, which that's what I tend to do is impressionistic work. Because you'll notice there are no details here yet. This is just shapes and colors. Now this is a mixture of orange. This was created with the permanent yellow light and mixing it with the pyro red. And then to make it stand out even more, I am placing it in between the two highlighted yellow trees. This is a fall foliage, so looking at the effects of it. And of course, there's also the initial laying was in purple, and so that purple's a kind of a brownish purple by now, but that will also help the oranges stand out a little bit more. And sometimes with foliage and tree shapes, it's a matter of continuing to work back into these shapes as the painting progresses. And right now I'm not 100% thrilled with what those trees look like. But as we continue to work and push the colors, it will become more and more apparent that this tree grouping on the right is going to be where the focal point is going to be. The other trees are going to recede, hopefully, into the background a little bit more. They're not going to receive as much detail, because if you want to create a good focal point, what you want to make sure you're doing is that if there are some more detailed sections, that you need to limit those to just that one area. Because after all, what we're trying to do with a focal point is to draw people's attention to that one area, and not to provide too much distraction. If we had everything was detailed, then you wouldn't know exactly where I wanted you to focus your attention on. Here, it's another yellowish green mixture to push this part of the landscape back, and also to note that this is where more of the sun is hitting the grass at this point, to make that a little bit lighter. And then taking a few sections as we move a little closer to the viewer to do that as well, and to kind of give the impression of a little bit of a ridge, as if we are moving up a hill towards these trees, and that the viewer is perhaps standing in a lower section of grass. Maybe a trail in which they would have to climb up or move up a small incline. And notice that I'm working my way down the painting from the top to the bottom. That helps me to remember that as I get closer to the viewer, I want a little bit more texture and a little bit more color variety. Here I'm mixing up another green. This is using some phthalo blue and the permanent yellow light. And you notice that doesn't quite look like a natural green yet, but when I mix on the painting surface here, it should become a little bit more natural. So let's see what happens here. And you can vary the tone sometimes of the color by just how much pressure you put on your brush. For example, there, I'm not pushing down much at all in order to get this bright green across the painting. And see how on the palette, I didn't actually think that this would work. But as I put it on the painting surface next to the other colors, it really creates some vibrant feeling. And then especially as I mix it into some of those darker purple masses that were originally on the canvas panel. And at this point, what I've decided to do is just to continue using that color all the way across the painting surface. And then I will darken this color as I move towards the foreground with that remaining section. And with this section here, I'm also realizing that the grasses are taller, and so you notice that the movement of my brush was more vertical than horizontal to create that kind of effect, allowing some of the darker tones to remain behind it to give that impression of some darker grasses and taller grasses. Now here I am just mixing into my pool of green again with a little bit more ultramarine blue and a little bit more of the yellow permanent deep. Of course, this palette I'm using, 2 yellows, 2 reds, 2 blues, and titanium white. And notice I can get to just about any color that I want to. And it's a little bit quicker, especially if you're going to be doing painting outdoors, to have what most artists refer to as a warm and a light, a cooler and a warmer color. So the cool yellow in this case would be the permanent yellow light, and then the other would be the permanent yellow deep. So now I'm taking that darker green and then putting it right at the very bottom of the canvas panel, and see how that relates to the other colors in a pretty good way. And I'm just going to pull this, and once again notice more of my strokes are going in the vertical direction to create that illusion of tall grasses with just a little bit of variation. Here I'm wondering about the effect of light, and I think I have created it in that middle section with some of those yellows and the phthalo green. But I'm also worried that I may not have allowed enough space in this foreground. It seems a little overbearing and almost like a wall. And so I'm also thinking I need to develop some kind of a trail or something to allow the viewer to step in more into the painting. And so I'll be making some corrections about that as the painting progresses. Here, another mixture. This is a phthalo blue and titanium white. And wasn't quite happy with the blue of the sky. I want to produce a little bit more of vibrancy in the blue. So I'm basically creating a cerulean blue, which you can make very easily from a phthalo blue and titanium white. The reason why you might want to use phthalo blue and titanium white, for one thing, it only takes a little bit of the phthalo blue to create this color, rather than buying a whole tube of cerulean. Phthalo has more uses. And notice how bright that is compared to what I had previously put down. And so once again, as many artists do, I'm working from my darks to my lights. And so now that I've covered the canvas completely, I'm going to be concentrating on the lights. And so I'm going back in, and of course, as you get closer to the horizon, the colors are usually a little bit lighter. And so in my mind, that's what I want to have happen with this imaginary landscape. And of course, with a flat brush, one of the nice things about the flat brush, you can turn it on its edge and just use a little bit of the point of the brush. Here, I'm trying to be careful to cut into the trees to create some of the shapes of the trees and not just the shape of the sky. At the same time, I don't want to obliterate some of the edge work of the trees at this point. This is where I talked about the pushing, the cutting of one color into the other, and then taking the other color and then pushing it back into the color that you just laid. And you will see that happen as the painting process continues. Notice what's that color is doing to the other colors. And for me at least, I like that contrast. It's creating a little bit of a break between the ground plane and the sky. And of course, the darkest dark should really be the trees and the foreground, and the lightest should be the sky. And so I'm kind of playing with that to create the sense of light. And I just didn't feel that the bluish purple that had been painted previously in that first layer, it seemed more like an evening sky to me than a sky that's going to produce some effects of sunshine bearing down on the grass. Now I'm taking this large, I think it's a 2-inch fan brush. Nothing special here, just a cheap fan brush, and just kind of using that to thin out the edge work of those two blues so that they mesh together. And then I'm once again using a little bit of that to mix back into the edges of the trees. I'm pretty happy with that section there. Now I'm noticing a few of these little, what we might call sky holes, and using my finger to just soften those a little bit so that they don't stand out too much. Right there, you see me pushing into it, so that way it doesn't look like some kind of a dot, but rather a more of a natural color of that blue sky, just barely coming visible there in the trees. And I'll do that again as the time progresses on the other side to soften some of those colors that you see now too, that may appear as kind of blue dots instead of the sky peering through. Sometimes you'll struggle more with certain sections of a painting than others. I must say that I struggled more with this particular painting in several places. Perhaps that's because I was working from my imagination. Oftentimes, for beginners, it can be a lot easier to have some kind of a reference photo or to paint from real life. So now I'm taking this oranges mixture and I'm putting some titanium white into it and a little bit more yellow and eventually some blue to make this more of a light brown. And here I'm going to be concentrating on creating a little bit of some texture with these grasses. So if the grasses are tall, you're going to see, especially during the fall, a lot more yellows. And so that's what I'm concentrating here with this kind of tannish yellow, is to use it in sparing ways, to especially here closer to the horizon line, just a small pop in of this color along the edges of the grass will create a kind of nice effect that these are taller grasses too, even though they're at a distance from the viewer. So you notice I'm keeping my brush strokes rather small and trying to vary those strokes. Now, as I come closer to the viewer, then my strokes will become larger as well. Here, I'm just taking a little bit of the burnt umber and darkening that mixture, that same mixture that I just applied, now a little bit darker, and we're going to go down to this darker grass at the very top of the darker grass, where the sun is also hitting it. And so, do you begin to see how the light is affecting these colors and the shifting between certain parts of the scene from dark to light? And there's the section where I'm going to have to do some more work, because although it sort of works here, I still feel like the viewer is not really being invited to go back in to the painting, to those trees. And since that's going to be the focal point, I'm going to have to work a little bit out on some kind of trail, maybe some rocks, sandy patches where there's nothing growing, to get you back into the painting. Once again, stepping away from the painting, seeing it from a different perspective is always important. So from time to time, you'll notice that there's no activity going on. That is oftentimes when I'm getting up from my stool and taking a few steps back to check on how the painting looks from a distance, because that's actually how I want it to be viewed. People are not going to be right up at it. Here too, I wanted to soften some of those edges to give it a sort of and push it back. And now notice that I'm pushing the color back into the blues of the sky that I had just earlier painted around these tree masses. And with the brush, this is a dry brush, going back over some of those sky holes to soften them, to make them more natural. So pretty happy with that. I think that effectively pushed all of those colors back just a little bit, so that it seems as if that tree section is further back than the tree grouping that's on the right hand side of the painting. And then I'm taking that the bold purple that was kind of on the horizon line, and blurring that a little bit. Oftentimes, if it's in the morning and there's still a little bit of fog, that fog is oftentimes close to the ground, and I'm giving that sense that there might be a little bit of a fog up there in those distant trees, helping to create that sense of distance. Here again, instead of the little blotches of yellow that were quite evident before, I'm basically taking this flat brush and gently blending them together to create a softer effect for these leaves and these tree masses. And of course, sometimes what happens is when you do this, you may not always like the end result, and you'll end up going back into it with some other colors on top of it to bring the mask back forward, which is what you'll eventually see me do. Creating another group of colors to apply to the painting. Going for a little bit more of a punchy orange. So using again the Pyro Red and the Permanent Yellow Light to create this mixture, and then toning it down just a little bit with the Burnt Umber. Burnt Umber on this particular painting is the only earth tone that I have on my palette today. But I do find it is very helpful in creating some mixtures. And so now notice how that popping in some of these oranges brings this tree grouping forward. And this, like I said, is where the focal point is going to be. And so I'm trying to put some more of the detail and more color variation to attract your eye to this eventual focal point. And of course, oftentimes when the sun is shining on a group of trees like this, you're able to see more of the variety and a little bit more vivid colors because of the sun's intensity shining on the leaves that are closest to the source of light. Also vary the different brushes I'm using. Like this one is actually a round that I'm using now. I believe it's a round size 2 to apply the paint here. Ultramarine blue, and now I'm making a dark with ultramarine blue and the Madder Lake, which is a rich red. So this is actually richer than a black. And now I'm taking the rigger brush. This is a Princeton Aspen rigger brush. This is a synthetic bristle brush, and just taking and pulling that up to create my focal point, which is going to be this tree mass. And so now I'm just easing the pressure as I pull that up. And of course, trees have lots and lots of branches, and so we don't want to be shy about creating those branches, and the branches will go in various directions. So I'm intentionally trying to draw that out. Tree branches grow towards the source of light, and so if my light source is over on the left-hand side of the painting today, I want to make sure that I'm suggesting that this particular tree is growing that direction. And I can vary the pressure that I am drawing that trigger brush up and not redoing the paint on it, so that way the color gets a little bit lighter as I'm pulling it up. You notice it's not quite as strong. And now just drawing some more in the background. They're going to be rather light, as if they're a little bit more distant than the initial tree that I drew. Same way with there, just a little suggestion of some other trees in the distance that are also growing in that fashion upwards. See how that immediately draws your eye in, and it's beginning to establish the importance of the lights and the darks, because you get a sense that the light is illuminating this section of the painting, this grouping of trees, and therefore giving us the sense of this detailed dark in relationship to the lights that were painted earlier, both on the grass plane and then these wonderful colors in the tree mass. Then I'm taking that rigger brush and notice I'm pulling it down to connect the tree to the earth. Sometimes our trees can look just like sticks if we don't take the added step of showing that there's a root system here that is connecting itself into the ground. Here's another mass of trees and another suggestion of a tree that we can see a little bit more there. Once again, using the principle that an odd number of trees that are going to be detailed is helpful to the viewer. So you notice right now we're up to 3 that you can distinctly see that are dark. And notice that the place that they are attached to the ground level varies. They're not all on the same line. And that's helpful too. Create some variety. A sense of the landscape not being just a horizontal line there at the horizon. Now I'm taking a lighter mixture of that same purple that I had used for the dark trees, and I am putting a few in that second grouping. Now here's the part of the painting I really thought went well, is these tree groupings right now. In some ways, as I look at this painting, I kind of wish I hadn't added the trail, although maybe the trail doesn't look too bad. You'll have to comment on it when I put that in, but I really thought that this section here of these 2 tree groupings and how the one looks further back than the other really did work. And you get a sense that there's a little bit of a fog underneath the trees on the left-hand side, and yet you see just enough detail to know that those are trees. Now here I'm doing the same thing. I don't want your attention so far over to the right of the canvas that your eyes leave my painting to somebody else's. And so, but at the same time, I want to establish the fact that these leaves are attached to trees, and especially in the fall when you've got different colors on the trees, you tend to see more of the branches. And so that's a lighter purple that you're seeing there. It also, as I'm drawing it up, I believe it highlights and pushes forward a little bit the light source that's coming through those branches in the trees. Did you notice how before I had added these branches on these trees, the colors, the oranges and the yellows of that mass didn't seem as bright? It's all about contrast. And sometimes the best way to make something lighter or darker is by the play of the 2 colors together, rather than thinking you just have to add more titanium white, which is oftentimes the worst thing you can do. Because using too much, it's easier to get darker colors than to produce lighter colors. Think about it. And then, of course, titanium white has a nasty habit of turning everything into a chalky mess. So I try as best I can to limit my use of titanium white as best as possible for that very reason. Now here, after I've already put in those trees, do you ever see a tree that doesn't look really connected to the leaves? So you have to go back in over top of some of those to give the effect that there are leaves covering portions of those branches that you are not able to see. Now to produce this effect of light, I'm going in with a lighter shade of yellow. This once again is permanent yellow light mixed in with some titanium white, and just a small amount of titanium white. And then as I'm pushing this color in with a small flat brush, notice how the orange is also standing out a little bit more. And all I'm trying to do is cover the mass, just the edges, I don't want too many highlights. All you need sometimes is just a little bit of color popped in here or there that will draw our attention in and be much more effective than if we overdo it. Even here, I'm almost on the verge of overdoing it. Now, on the other side, I'm noticing that I want to emphasize that orange as much as possible as a focal point. So, around the edge of this tree, I'm going back in with some highlights of the effect of light, producing a little bit more yellow on some of these trees. I'll go back through and reshape those a little bit as we progress. Here is Madder Lake mixed in with a little bit of the burnt umber to create a little bit more, a few highlights, some reddish highlights to draw a little bit of a distinction with some of those oranges. And then I'm popping in a little bit more of that red in the foreground region, because whenever you have green, the eye really hungers for some red, which is a compliment. Now here's that brownish earth color that I mixed using all the primaries, and just suggesting now some distinctions in the fact that we're kind of looking uphill from our vantage point as the viewer of this painting. And so I'm going to be turning that into some rocks. And all you missed there was me basically taking the palette knife. I'd made a couple mistakes, and so I'd blocked those out. I'm going in with a few lights, and then I'm going to go back in with a few darks to create the illusion of a few rocks and sandy patches where things are not growing, and the light hitting these areas to produce a nice effect of wanting to walk up the hill to see what's beyond it into these rows of trees. Here's where I'm stumbled a little bit in thinking about how to get you up into the painting. I was just going to go with that foreground and have the two lighter sections kind of crisscross across the canvas there, but that didn't make a whole lot of sense. It still feels like you're blocked from going up that hill. So I want to create this idea that you're being invited to walk up the hill. Now I'm taking some of the ultramarine and Madder Lake to create a dark purple, and then putting that underneath some of those lighter colors to suggest some depth, some rocks with different shades. Palette knives can be very helpful in the painting process, especially when you've got other paint layers already on canvas. You can get you can lay down a little bit more paint with them, and especially if you're when you get a few touches of some thicker paint, they can be very excellent. No, I noticed as I backed up that the focus of the painting had changed. The lights and the darks were too great of a contrast, and so they were pulling the viewer's eyes away from the tree mass and onto the path. And while I want you to focus a little bit on the path, I don't want that to become the primary narrative of this painting. And so I went ahead and used the palette knife to soften this illusion of some rocks. I thought it would be good to bring someone in from this other corner of the painting into this one. And pretty soon I'm going to obliterate some of these tall grasses in the very front so that I can suggest a path of these kind of rocks that one might climb up towards these tree formations. So in just a minute you'll see me add a few more of those. There was just that green area there, and it needed a little bit of a contrast. Whenever you have a space where there's just one tonal value, oftentimes you'll need to add something to it to make it stand out less. And just a couple of strokes of color can sometimes create the illusion of detail. Here in the foreground, I'm thinking about some sticks and some vegetation growing, and using the palette knife to help create that illusion. Now I'm taking that rock formation even further into the foreground so that there's a sense that the viewer can step right into the painting and head up towards the focal point. And so happy with that at this point in time, as you'll see there. I think that's just the right amount of detail, really. And do you notice now the sense of light? You get this light kind of shining from above, hitting on these various places, moving us towards the focal point of the trees, the orange and yellow trees, and then the sense of being invited to come out of the deeper forest up this hill to more of the light source. Now for some texture and variety, I'm taking some of that ultramarine blue and madder lake, which is created my dark, and putting in a few strokes with just the side of the palette knife, create the illusion of some sticks or branches or young trees that are growing here, this kind of foliage in the front of the painting. I must say that this was one of those paintings where I wasn't quite sure that it actually worked when I was done with it, and yet I'm glad that I taped the painting of it. And as I'm watching this and doing the voiceover with you today, I'm actually I'm more impressed with what the painting turned out like. And sometimes that will happen for you. You will need to step away from it and come back to it to evaluate it properly. There will be times in which what you're really reacting to is whether you enjoyed the painting process or not. I've had bad paintings in which I thought I did a great job because I felt like I had fun in the painting process, and vice versa. Paintings that I really struggled with in the process and thought they were terrible. So, and now I took a step back and I'm going to sign the painting. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so, and give me a thumbs up. That will really help the channel. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.